All right, thanks. My name is Bert. I'm very happy to be here today and to introduce to you Eric Fontenot, who is an IT Enterprise Architect at City of Austin, my hometown. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your time with me today. You've come to Playing Well with Others, also known as sharing your Cribl.Cloud deployment organization. Who am I? As Bert said, my name is Eric Fontenot, IT Enterprise Architect at City of Austin. Presently, I am responsible for the city's SIEM implementation. I've been working in IT for over 20 years. While I haven't seen everything, I've seen quite a lot. I'm sure a lot of you out there probably have as well. But today, specifically, I'll be reviewing a challenge that was set forth before me, walk through some of the thought process I went through, as well as the solution we ended up with. I'll be going over ways to share your existing Cribl.Cloud deployment with other groups in your organization. Introduce some of the concepts, go over what may not work for your organization, what I think will probably work best, how to ensure administrative separation, explain how it works, look over the experience. At the end, if there's time, go through some Q&A. Here's the situation. Everyone wants Cribl. I'm sure you all have this problem, right? We had a group come to us. They tried a proof of concept deployment of Cribl. They liked what they saw. They wanted to move forward, started hitting roadblocks with the purchasing department. Realized that we already had an existing Cribl deployment, well built out, tied in with our IDP and everything like that. So pretty early on in the process, they got set up with us, connected with them, and then we're able to work towards a solution. You might find yourself in a similar position where you want to be able to onboard various groups of IT professionals into Cribl and provide them with their own clear administrative boundary to work within. These groups may have their own compliance requirements, as well as operational structures that really just need to be upheld. How can you accomplish that without driving them to seek their own solutions? Shadow IT, keep away from that. First, let's explore some of the possible solutions that may kind of work, but really may not be ideal. You can get your own tenant, right? Everybody can go out there, get their own Cribl deployment, get it set up, get it tied in, but how would the purchasing department see that? Two groups under the same umbrella, separate line items, same company, probably not a good look. Plus you have all the lead time to getting that contract written up. You might really like your current contract terms and the relationships you've already developed with your partner. Additionally, you've got the constraints of if you've got a shared IDP, having two separate Cribl organizations is really not that easy to manage. So why not? Deploy worker groups. If all you do is live in stream, sure, that's great, Create worker group separations, set your roles, permissions, get everything configured that way, have everybody use their own instance within stream. The problem is that you're missing out on search, lake, edge, all the other new developments that Cribl is going to be producing in the future. They don't really follow that whole worker group boundary that's set forth within stream. Set up the permissions in stream, they exist in stream. For these reasons, probably be best if everyone operated under a shared structure to perform their work, a workspace for everyone. You can leverage this Cribl.Cloud enterprise feature. It's called Workspaces. They were introduced in version 4.6 as a solution for this very problem. This is a pull quote from April 2024 release notes, version 4.6. Basically, from the outset, it's been designed to be exactly this kind of solution for multi-tenancy, and they've been building on it ever since. In fact, I have it on good authority that Cribl themselves actually use Workspaces to deliver labs where users get their own dedicated space to get hands-on. Direct quote. So, we've determined that we want to onboard another group of IT professionals into our existing Cribl organization. What should we focus on moving forward? We should probably determine what resources they need access to and at what permission levels. This will definitely come up later. We should also have a heart-to-heart with this group as to what we feel is a reasonable amount of license they can consume. Some obvious examples are daily log volume ingest, cloud computing credits. I'm sure you've probably dealt with this. Note that as of today, there's no formal way to impose licensing quotas using workspaces, but be sure to speak to the Cribl team today if this presents a critical challenge to your deployment plans. I'm sure that they're receptive to the feedback. For our use case, the group we were working with onboarding only needed a small portion of our daily ingest to start. Luckily, we had the headroom to accommodate the request, had a strong understanding that together we would work with our purchasing group and our Cribl team to grow that implementation over the next several years. Also, before we continue, I'd like to take a second to make some assumptions about your environment. These are not going to hold true for everybody, but just for the purposes of this talk and keeping it simple, go through that. Assume you already have a well-established, centralized identity governance. I'm assuming that this is backed by a single enterprise identity provider and your organization is comfortable working within it. It allows for SAML integrations as well. It also really helps if you have a well-established identity group structure that follows the lines of your org charts. That one's pretty critical. I also assume you already have a well-lived-in enterprise Cribl deployment that has an existing SSO implementation to that identity provider. Along those same lines, you should probably consider restricting the existing IT team, the one that already lives within Cribl, right, to just their workspace and limit the organization owner role to a specific set of identities to instill overall organizational trust. Think your core admins that are currently using Cribl today, right, that work within it, have them just be the organization owners and nobody else. For this case, they probably will need a second identity, one for organization owner to do organization level manipulation, and then one for their workspace admin stuff. I do advocate for multi-identity just for that situation. Each team should have at least one assigned administrator over their own workspace. No team should be an administrator over another workspace. Of course, there's going to be situations where that won't hold, but just to keep it simple, do it that way. Not all identities require administrative access over workspaces. Some people might just want to be able to see the routes and things, see how the system's set up. Just a couple of things to consider. There's a bunch of documentation that'll go over all the roles that you can assign to people, read through them, get familiar with them. Additionally, you probably already have that well-lived-in Cribl environment, and it probably exists under main, right? You might want to consider creating another workspace for your existing system and kind of move everybody into a named workspace, right? For maybe your enterprise group or your division group or whatnot. And that way, there's a clearer separation between main and then the group that's actually doing the work. If this is something that you want to go through and establish, talk with the Cribl team today. They have some tools that'll make this a lot easier. So you've worked through the details, have a plan on how to onboard the new team into the Cribl organization. Let's walk through the steps necessary to accomplish this task. It's pretty straightforward, but quick overview. Make sure you're logged in as a Cribl organizational owner. Kind of self-explanatory, right? Additionally, since we're assuming you're using an SSO implementation, ensure that you have access to create role assignments and tie them back to service principals within your IDP. Here we're showing that the Cribl.Cloud organization portal. From here, you can create a new workspace simply by clicking on the current workspace at the top, main, add workspace, and fill it out. It's that easy, realistically. A couple of caveats, right? There are restrictions to the characters you can use, alphanumeric only. It'll be visible every time that the user logs in. The URL will actually contain this identity, and it cannot be changed. So make sure that it's something that you want to continue using moving forward. Then click on Save, which is not shown on this slide, and wait. It can take about 7 to 15 minutes for the workspace to actually fully provision. And before we can really continue, you have to let it finish. So we'll take some time to figure out how we're going to build out that Cribl team, right, that we're going to tie back to the identity provider. Start with your access structures. You got your scope and permission levels, right? The Venn diagram, groups of individuals, permission levels, product access, and the overall workspace that they're going to be accessing. My typical guidance is to provide at least privilege possible to an individual in order for them to do their job. So that's probably most people's guidance as well. Full breakdown, again, per product permissions can be found on the docs. I'll have them linked later. Do also want to take a moment to recognize that any one identity can be a member of several of these Cribl teams. In such a situation, they would have the aggregated highest level of permission assigned from each team, so you can do kind of overlapping permissions if you need to. You also want to take the time to think about how you'll name your teams. Note that there are built-in roles that Cribl employs, and we want to take care not to overlap those. These roles can actually be found on the SSO implementation page, not shown here. But basically, if you don't start your team names with the word Cribl, you'll probably be fine. Here, we chose to start our names with WS to denote that it's a workspace that we're granting access to. The next section here you see is main on all of these to denote they have access to the main workspace. And then the permission set that they're actually granting access to. Admin, editor, owner, stream admin, user, the kind of self-explanatory, the descriptions are there. This page is actually a direct example of first step on how we chose to move our existing single group of IT professional deployment into a shared model. We moved away from using the built-in Cribl SSO roles to effectively this. All right, we've stalled long enough. Hopefully the new workspace is created. Let's continue. Click on Create Team. And here, we're creating the team for data workers. These people will have access to the newly created Cribl.Con workspace. They're going to be users who want to be able to log into Cribl, look at stream and search, see how it's configured, but not actually make any changes within the system. They primarily view SIEM data, and maybe they just want a better visibility on how the data is being routed through the system. Assign a unique name, give it a description, assign the mapping IDs to the Cribl team, and then that gets assigned back to the identity provider role, later slide. This is a critical step, allows our identity provider to be the source of truth in determining which individuals get what access levels. Note that you can input multiple mapping IDs here, but for simplicity's sake, I just match the team name. Always advocate for simplicity whenever possible. From here, select the newly created Cribl.Con workspace from the dropdown. And since we're not going to give them either admin or owner, which is kind of a canned, all permission levels, we choose member and choose each of the individual product permissions that we want to grant. And here, again, we're going to just grant them user access for stream and search, but no access for edge and lake. Also on here, at the very, very bottom, you see that little team members tab. That's a special section for invited accounts within your Cribl organization. If they don't map directly to an IDP and you want to grant them access to a team, you can do it here. I'm not really going to go over that. It kind of belies the point of not having or using an IDP. But it is possible. Here's a modified example of how our Entra ID handles these role mappings. This is a role mapping page from Entra ID. Do recognize that not all identity providers are created the same. Entra uses role, the keyword role, to denote how they actually map these back. Some other IDPs, as you're probably well all aware, use groups or business units or some other service principal construct to denote how the SAML claim gets handled. So for here, we're using roles. This is the claim sent to the implementation of the Cribl SSO and mapped back to the Cribl team by way of the mapping IDs. Role mapping shown here can match up to the Cribl teams on the previous slides. WS main user is workspace main user, right? Pretty clear, hopefully. Using that mapping ID we created on the previous slide, we would actually, in this example that's not shown, we would create that same data workers role, right, to be a part of that Cribl team, and then allow them to work within Cribl.Cloud. In Entra, like I said, this is a two-step process. We'd create it here, we'd create the role here, and then we'd go back to the actual assignments and then assign that role to a service principal, either a user or a group object. We use well-defined security groups in our implementation, follow along the organizational chart boundaries. For security purposes, chose not to have a slide of that. But we can use our imaginations to picture something called like HR SIEM data workers and then map that back to that data worker role that we created on the previous slide. All right, so we got everything set up. What is it like from a Cribl organization owner's experience? And more importantly, what is it like from the user's experience? Right here, I'm logged in as a Cribl organizational owner, trying to check the permissions assigned to an SSO user who was granted access to data workers team that we created on the previous slide. But unfortunately, we can only tell that they have user access to the organization, right? That's the level of visibility that we have here. The individual permissions that we assigned aren't being listed. I speculate this is because permissions can be changed from one configuration at a time at the identity provider, right? The identity provider controls this. But if you feel like you require the ability to see a state and time breakdown of the SSO user's permission levels, as well as maybe the last time they logged into the console, please speak with the Cribl team to advocate for this change. More importantly, what does it look like whenever the user logs in? Whenever they log in, and if they happen to get directed to a workspace that they don't have access to, in this case, the user didn't have access to that main workspace, they won't be able to really access any of the products, right? But you can direct them to click main at the top there, or the workspace that they have up there, and then click on the one that they do have access to. In this case, is CriblCon. It feels like it was kind of a bug a couple of versions ago. I don't think that this is so much a problem anymore, but this is something that we did have to direct a few of our first users to perform one time whenever they logged in, and then they were subsequently directed to their own workspaces that they did have access to. And then they'll have access to browse the products they were granted permission to. Pretty simple, right? You got your stream and search there that we granted user access to on the previous slide, and they don't have access to Edge and Lake. Yeah. So in conclusion, Workspace feature is a tool built into the product. It simplifies separation of administrative boundaries within your Cribl organization and allows sharing within your own organization. Hopefully it can solve challenges that most organizations face with IT personnel creating disparate solutions to their own problems, which can lead to increased tech debt and operational costs. I also covered a few of the planning exercises you should work through prior to implementation for smoother transition. But with a bit of planning, you can easily onboard multiple teams into your existing Cribl.Cloud organizational structures and have them access to the tools that they need to be successful. Here's some of the reference materials that I alluded to earlier. I'll be moving back to this slide at the end. I've also been told that these slide decks will be made available after the presentation upon request. And thank you. There's a lot more nuance and care that can be taken on this journey, but I hope this talk has gotten you thinking about the possibilities that Workspaces can offer you and your teams. At this time, I would like to do some questions and answers.
Oh, golly. Questions? Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering how restrictive you can make like the permissions. So let's say we have a worker group that has a source, like a Splunk hex source, and we vend multiple tokens, but the tokens might be for different data, like point of sale data or like network data. If we wanted to create like a workspace for the network team, could we restrict just for that one particular token, so they just see the network data and they don't see like the point of sale data?
I think I see what you're asking. Keep in mind that the workspace is a full, like, segregated stack. So you're building an entirely new worker group structure and construct. For something like individual manipulation of credentials within an existing built-out worker group, that's a little beyond this, I think, I feel. But thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a way that you can share the Microsoft Entra ID related settings and stuff like that in a documentation? Because we use Entra ID and we were able to just use the Cribl documentation and set up Entra ID for search users. But every time a user is onboarded to that Entra group, I have to go in and add that member part of a search team that we created inside Cribl Workspace.
That's interesting.
So it's not automatically loading the members. So
Right.
I think so there is some misconfiguration on the Entra side.
Are you sending the roles back through the SAML claim?
I don't think so. We are doing that.
That's probably what's going wrong, honestly. You probably just need to make sure that the actual role assignments themselves are being sent back through the claim. So I highly suggest getting with support on how to configure that and make sure that it's set up properly. The documents do go over it, but it's best to have somebody help you out with that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Hi, I saw that you named a workspace beginning with WS underscore. I was wondering if you have any recommendations for naming conventions when different folks have to share the same workspace.
So I do want to clarify that the workspace itself wasn't named WS underscore. That was the team name. That's not, the team names aren't strictly visible to people, so they're not, yeah, they can be a little bit more loose. As far as naming conventions go, I would really consider thinking about how you want to break out your organization and permissions first. Like, kind of build that structure out on like a worksheet or just draw it out or something like that. And then the names kind of come from that, I feel, right? It might make sense to name it by the group that's actually doing the data manipulation. It might make sense to do it based on the product, right? But that just depends on how you're going to build your work groups out and grant the access to the various individuals.
Good afternoon. Have you looked into the projects component to kind of break down what respective end users could be doing within an instance, within like a workspace, rather than creating a separate workspace dedicated for those specific business units? And also, how are you handling, let's just say like you want to have like a dev UAT prod environment, right? Are you separating those out by workspaces as well, or are you separating those out by like worker groups?
Okay, so first question, projects? Go ahead and hold on to the mic for a second.
Yeah, so I was in a class yesterday.
Is this a new feature?
I don't know if it's new.
Okay, because if it's a new feature, the answer is no. I hadn't considered it.
Got it. Yeah, but they're discussing the use of projects and to be able to break down permissions or for specific end users by what data they'd be leveraging within a specific project, right?
That's interesting.
So that's why I was asking if that was being used within one of your workspaces. And then the other is about how are you breaking it down by environments?
Break it down by environments. Can you give me an example?
So if I wanted to separate my dev use cases from my prod use cases, so if I didn't want to have production data, but I wanted to mess around with synthetic data or kind of seeing what those flows would look like before actually sending it, or having something configured within a production environment. That's also a reason I asked you about the worker groups, if you are doing it by worker group. So possibly having like a pipeline or routes on one worker group, testing that out, and then essentially replicating that over to another, and then, get what I'm saying? You know where I'm going?
I think so, yeah. So moving routes and pipelines, and if this is not what you're talking about, correct me. But if you're considering at some point moving pipelines and routes out of like a development or a test environment over to a production environment, there are ways to do that across work group boundaries and also workspace boundaries, right? I like to think of work groups as kind of an overarching structure that encompasses work groups. So if you find a use case where you might want to separate something out into different work groups, you can also consider at the same time maybe separating it into different workspaces so that you can permission it out maybe a little bit more cleaner so that that data can also be, piped through Lake or Edge or whatnot in a similar kind of clean fashion. But as far as actually taking those routes, pipelines, and everything and migrating them over to a different work group, as I alluded to in the presentation, there is the capacity to do that. There are tools that exist, and you can get comfortable with the tools, but it's not an easy button, right? If I recall, it requires having a Python environment, just sitting there running the code to actually ingest the data or ingest all the pipelines and all the objects that you want and then push it back up to the other work group. So, but Cribl themselves, they can help you get that set up if that's what you're looking for.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully that helps.
I will say, regarding projects, your question around projects, knowing the teams that were involved in this, in setting up the workspaces, projects would not have been enough separation of permissions for these two groups. So, yeah, it was considered briefly, but it would not have been enough. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Is there a limit to the number of workspaces you can have before cost comes into play?
That's a great question. Do you have an answer for that, Bert?
Okay. Do you know what the limit is?
Not a hard limit, I'm understanding.
Probably extensible. Let me get you a better answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I almost asked if anyone wanted to hear.
Question around the search datasets. How can we apply the same level of user-based controls to a search dataset? Like, for example, I have like 10 datasets. I don't want all users to view those 10 datasets.
Right.
Inside each dataset, we do have a way of like doing share. So is that any way that we can get away from that clicking that share and making it more autonomous with an IDP setup, or like?
So theoretically, workspaces should allow separation for search to give users access to their own effectively instance of search, right? And if you can build something out specifically in a workspace that only one user has access to, then it should be able to be built out into a different workspace similarly so that they have a smaller scope of access. I think that might answer the question, maybe not. I'm not.
So if you are adding more data sets to search, say for example, I'm adding a new Lake data set inside search, and I want it to be available only to a set of users. For that, right now, I have to go into search and then look at that data set and hit the share button and add the team who needs that access inside search right now. Okay. So is there a way that we can automate this so that like it's all tied to this rollback access control where I don't have to go and keep punching the share button every time I add a data set, or else it becomes a SOP for us to like, whenever we are adding a data set, it becomes like an SOP for us to like go and add necessary access to the teams, or else they will be screaming.
I don't think I have a good answer right now for that, but we can talk a little bit later after.
Sure.
Okay.
Similar, you could So yeah, we've done something similar. You could automate that through like a service, and we automated it through like Python libraries and Terraform. I can talk to you about that a little bit more if you want. Yeah.
We are just at time. One more question.
One more question.
I think we're good. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.